Okay, welcome to another episode of Mr. K is Wrong, where I debunk a right winger that I knew in my high school days. I look at his Facebook posts and I go over the ways in which they are wrong, and so far, they are often, ridiculously wrong. One of them was a Nazi esque post. This one's a little bit more moderate that I'm looking at today, though. It's not particularly racist or offensive one. So his meme that he shared, it has a cartoon guy with his thumb up and he's smiling or whatever, and it says, "Imagine working 9 to 5 for 50 years, then the Fed prints 40% of the total money supply and inflates away 20 years of your work." The meme is by conservatives today and has the added comment of "ouch." So, what's there to debunk about that one? Well, the Fed didn't steal your labor, it's capitalism that did. So, first, let's be clear, this meme sounds anti establishment, but it's really just conservative cosplay. It pretends to criticize systemic failure while ignoring who props up the system, including the very people sharing this sort of meme in the first place. The right wingers. Yes, inflation can erode savings. Yes, the Federal Reserve expanded the money supply during COVID, but let's not pretend this is some isolated betrayal by a rogue central bank. This is capitalism functioning as designed, a system both Republicans and corporate Democrats uphold with religious fervor. So, I need to do an irony check here. Republicans valorize work like it's holy. That's one of the ironic things about this meme about, like, imagine working for 50 years and suddenly all your work's value, the money you saved up, has gone away. Well, they're the first to sneer at people who don't want to spend their lives in wage cages. They're scoffing at anyone who would want to avoid that sort of, I guess, stupid trap. Get a job, they bark at anyone who resists the 40-hour grind. They mythologize bootstraps lifting you up, lifting yourself up by the bootstraps and hard work while rigging the economy to funnel wealth upward. So when they share a meme like this, crying about stolen labor, it's like arsonists whining about smoke damage. It's pretty ridiculous. And the Democrats, well, their corporate wing claps along. Biden's Fed chair, Jerome Powell, who was a Republican appointee, I'll talk more about him in a little bit. You know, these uh these people, they just kept doing what capitalist central banks always do: protect markets, not workers. Neither party has a plan to decouple survival from wage labor or to democratize the economy in any meaningful way. So they argue over who should hold the whip, not whether we should abolish the plantation, so to speak. So, who is the the person who was in the Fed? Who is Jerome Powell? Well, first of all, he was appointed as Federal Reserve Chair by Donald Trump in 2018. So that's a little bit of an odd thing to exclude from that meme, right? Seems like a crucial detail that maybe they should have actually included there. And he was reappointed by Joe Biden in 2021, but again, remember who originally put him in there in 2018, just a few years before. A Republican and former private equity guy is not exactly a populist hero, but that's what Jerome Powell was. So, the meme is like a populist thing. It's meaning to sort of pluck at those heartstrings, but it's definitely misguided at least. So, what did Powell do in 2020 and 2021? Well, I did a little bit of digging on that topic, and there was massive monetary expansion during the COVID-19 crisis, the Fed increased the money supply significantly. So that part of the meme is right, but again, it's conveniently, somehow oddly leaving out that he was a Trump appointee. About 40% of all US dollars in circulation were created between early 2020 and early 2021. This was done through something they call quantitative easing, which is, it's a weird term, but the Fed bought trillions in US Treasury bonds and mortgage backed securities. And if you don't know what that means, that's okay. A lot of people don't. And they did that to inject liquidity into the financial system. So, it's not something you really necessarily know what it means if you're an outsider. And that's one of the special quirks of a meme like this. Like it doesn't get into the specifics. It doesn't really have educational value. It doesn't explain what all of these things mean. It's just something that you're supposed to share on Facebook and just nod in agreement without really having a deeper assessment of what the terms mean or anything like that. So really, what happened is there were zero interest rates. The Fed slashed interest rates to near zero to stimulate borrowing and spending. So that doesn't sound bad necessarily, but it uh, it was what the meme was critiquing basically. There were emergency lending facilities, created programs to support corporations, municipalities, and small businesses by backstopping their debt markets. And there was asset price inflation, not wage growth. So the primary effect was stock, housing, and assets soared. Those parts of the economy soared. The rich who own most of the assets got richer. Wages didn't keep up, and prices for essentials like food, rent, and fuel began to rise. So there was a delayed action on inflation. Powell insisted inflation was transitory for much of 2021. The Fed was slow to raise interest rates to fight rising prices, which led to worse inflation in 2022. Now, I'm not an expert on this, but that's what I've been led to believe happened. So later, the Fed started raising interest rates aggressively, which hurt regular people through higher mortgage, credit card, and loan costs. So they didn't keep the interest rates low. They raised them again, back to being high again. So what's the problem? If you're a skeptic of capitalism, you'll understand that the Fed wasn't trying to help working people, it was trying to preserve capital markets and corporate profit structures. It wasn't socialism, it was corporate welfare on steroids, with the Fed as the central planner for the investor class. Powell's actions saved Wall Street, not your job, not your rent, and certainly not your savings. If you're a conservative sharing this meme, you supported the party that put this guy in power. And you keep defending a system that forces people to work 50 years in the first place, which is a little bit ironic, because this is supposed to be like a rebellious meme here. So the meme accidentally points to a real problem: the absurdity of tying life, dignity, and security to decades of soul numbing labor, only for a few policy decisions to wipe out its value, potentially overnight. But the answer isn't tighter monetary policy or electing more Republicans. It's rejecting a system where your worth is determined by your productivity and obedience and pretty much nothing else. So, yes, ouch. But not because the Fed printed money. Ouch, because we built a society where people are forced to sell decades of their lives to survive, and even then, they still get robbed blind.